Okay, so hi, welcome back to my channel. So the other day I was thinking about video ideas and I thought that it would be really cool if I talked about my favorite books because I'm still in the very beginning of my channel and obviously my tastes are going to change. I'm going to read a bunch of different things and so I thought it would be really fun to talk about my current favorite books so that later on down the line I can do this video again and show you my new favorites. So without further ado, let's get into it. I should say these books are in no particular order with the exception of my actual favorite book, which I have talked about before. So anyway, I'm going to start by talking about Session 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This was a really popular book on BookTube when it came out. And so basically this book is a sci-fi literary fiction book and it shows the lives of 5 different characters who at some point in life cross paths. And it also alternates between timelines. So at the beginning of the story, you see a pandemic starting and you see that a lot of people die right away. And so you end up following some of the survivors of this pandemic and also some other characters that didn't actually survive the pandemic. And so the timeline goes back and forth between their lives before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and afterwards. And this book is extremely well written, and I loved the alternating POVs and the message that the author is trying to send, and seeing how all these characters ended up crossing paths. It's just so interesting and I loved it. I really fell in love with it when I read it. Okay, so next up is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, which I have talked about this whole trilogy a lot on my channel, and honestly I could just talk about the trilogy as a whole because I love it, but I would say that my favorite is still probably the first one. This is the first one in the trilogy, and this is a coming of age story following our main character Fitz. He is a royal bastard and he's left at the castle, and basically we're following him as he starts to navigate court life and learn how to use the magical skills that he has, and also he starts to learn how to become an assassin. So it's a very slow and character-driven trilogy, and this book is very slow and character-driven, but again, it's a coming-of-age story, so that would make sense. And this is very short actually, and I just think that despite the fact that it's very slow, I think it's actually really well paced and I love the characters. Robin Hobb has an amazing writing style and she is an amazing character writer. So there you go. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about the only manga entry on this list, which doesn't mean much because I just don't tend to read a lot of manga. I'm only reading a lot of manga now. Usually I watch the anime versions of these stories, but this one I started with the anime and I finished up with the manga. So I love it. It's one of my favorite stories of all time, so I'm gonna talk about it. That is Fairy Tail by Hiro Mashima. This is a fantasy story and it's set in a world where only about 10% of people have powers. They're called mages and they are divided between guilds. So there are good guilds, bad guilds, and neutral guilds. And we follow Fairy Tail, which is one of the guilds, and it's a very popular one. And in the beginning of the story, we start by following a character named Lucy. She is a celestial mage, which, by the way, there are a bunch of different types of powers in this story. This has a soft magic system, so the author just kind of does whatever he wants to do, and it's so fun to see him explore so many different types of powers. But basically, we're following Lucy in the beginning, and she wants very desperately to get into Fairy Tail because she just thinks that this sounds so cool. And basically, somewhere along the line, she ends up finding this guy named Natsu, and he is one of the best mages in Fairy Tail. And basically, they cross paths, they join forces, and at the end of their little adventure, he's like, why don't you come back with me to Fairy Tail and you can become a member? And yeah, she goes and she becomes a member of Fairy Tail, and the story ensues from there. Obviously, there are a bunch of different stories in this series because this is a shonen, so there are varying different story arcs, but this is finished, so it's not one of those that goes on forever, and it has a goal. There's a big baddie at the end, and everything that Hiro Mashima does here is working up to that point, so this isn't an aimless shonen, which I really appreciate. And another thing that I really, really love about this series is that Hiro Mashima has a bunch of different characters and he uses them all. He uses all of the Fairy Tail characters so many different times. Everyone has their own time to shine. And he uses the antagonists and other guilds so many times as well. It's really, really cool. I love it. And I love these characters so much. This is such an important and dear to my heart series. Okay, so next I'm just going to mention Full Tilt by Emma Scott, which is a romance book that I've talked about a lot on my channel, and I still want to do a book review sometime in the future, so I'm not going to say what it is about. If you want to know what it's about, go and watch my April wrap-up, because I talk about that there, but I wanted to mention it anyways because I read it last year and it became one of my favorites. So now I'm going to talk about the 2 Brandon Sanderson books that I have on this list. And the first one of those is The Well of Ascension. This is the second book in the Mistborn trilogy, so I'm not going to say what this specific book is about. But basically, the first book in this trilogy follows 2 main POVs, 𝐜𝐭𝐬𝐬 and Vin. And 𝐜𝐭𝐬𝐬 was a really popular thief and crew leader back in the day. And now he is a Mistborn. And basically in this world, the people who have powers can ingest metals, and depending on the metal that you use, you are given different powers. And Mistings are people who can only use one type of metal, and Mistborn are people who can use all types of metal. So 𝐜𝐭𝐬𝐬 is a Mistborn, and he wants to overthrow the Lord Ruler, who is the big bad guy in this series. And so he ends up recruiting a group of very skilled Mistings so that they can steal from the Lord Ruler and also overthrow him. And he ends up recruiting Vin, who is our second main character. And honestly, I would say she is the main character of this book. And she's another Mistborn, but she was a street urchin and she's very young. She's like 16 or something. Yeah, and so in the Final Empire, you're basically seeing them plan the heist. And you're also seeing a bit of a coming-of-age story with Vin. And you have the found family element in the story here that I love so much. So yeah, that's Mistborn. And the second book is much more character-driven, slow, and it has a bunch of politics, and I love that. And then the other Brandon Sanderson book on this list is Words of Radiance, and this is the second book in the Stormlight Archive series. So again, I'm not going to talk about the actual book that is on my list, but I'm going to talk about the first book in this series, and that is Way of Kings. And honestly, it works out well because the Way of Kings has a really special place in my heart as well. So I'm just going to talk about it. Basically, in the beginning of this story, you see that there's a king who is assassinated. And years later, you're following a war that has been going on as a revenge for the death of this king. And in The Way of Kings, you follow 3 main perspectives. You follow Dalinar, who is the brother of this king, and he has been trying to kind of understand his brother's last words for him. And he has also been seeing visions of ancient times, and he doesn't know what the visions mean. And he's kind of doubting his own sanity. And then the second POV that you get is the main POV of this story, and it's Kaladin, and he is a soldier turned slave, and you're seeing him and his position in the middle of this war where he's basically just trying to save himself and his men. And then the third and final POV in this book is following Shallan, who is trying to become an apprentice to Jasnah. Jasnah is Dalinar's niece, and she's a very well-known scholar. And so basically, Shallan tries to become Jasnah's apprentice, but not really because she wants to be Jasnah's apprentice. She just wants to steal something from her. And meanwhile, they kind of start finding out that maybe the research that she is doing for Jasnah might hint at what the true cause of this war that has been going on is. So that's The Way of Kings, and it's mostly set up, and basically at the end of The Way of Kings, you understand what this series actually is about. And so Words of Radiance just follows from there, but I think Words of Radiance so far has been the most well-balanced book in the Stormlight Archive in terms of character, plot, and world building, and the pacing is amazing. And it has amazing scenes. Like, there are so many iconic scenes in Words of Radiance. So, yeah, I love it. Next, we have Illuminae, and this is the first book in the Illuminae Files trilogy. And so, basically, this is a YA sci-fi book, and you have 2 main POVs, Katie and Ezra. And in the beginning of the story, you see that they used to be a couple, but they broke up. And then later on that same day, their planet gets attacked and invaded, and they have to flee. And they run away within a fleet, but their ships are still being pursued and attacked. And so basically you follow a back and forth between Ezra and Katie where they are trying to work together to solve this problem. And then this is actually told with a multimedia format. So you have surveillance camera footage, you have text messages, you have so many different types of files in this story. You have pictures and diagrams and stuff like that. It's really, really fun. And basically at the same time, not only are they being attacked and pursued by the people that try to invade their planet, there's also a plague that breaks out within their fleet. And there's also a crazy AI. So this is just a lot of fun. And the second book is a lot of fun as well. And it also follows kind of the same format, but I like Illuminae better just because I really, really love Katie and Ezra. And this is just a lot of fun and really easy to read because of the format. Then I'm going to talk about A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer. This is a YA retelling of Beauty and the Beast. And honestly, this is very close to the actual Disney movie. So basically in this book, you follow two POVs. You have Prince Ren and Harper. And there's actually a cerebral palsy representation here with Harper, and she is from our world. And she's just trying to make ends meet and help her mother who's sick. And basically one night she sees a guy trying to hurt a girl, and she intervenes and helps. And so the guy takes Harper instead. And what happens is that she's actually transported into Prince Ren's world, which is like a fairy tale-esque world. And she learns that he has been cursed. And so the curse that has been put on Prince Ren is that he has to live the autumn of his 18th birthday repeatedly. And every time the season ends, he becomes a monster. And the only way for him to break the curse is to get a girl to fall in love with him. So he has been basically taking girls from our world to maybe get them to fall in love with him. And so this time it's Harper's turn, but she's not amused and she tries to run away, and a lot of adventures ensue. This is so much fun, and they end up trying to kind of save Ren's kingdom, and it's just so magical, and I love it so much. I love these characters, and I haven't heard good things about the sequels, but this one is just so perfect for what it is. And now last but not least, my favorite book, Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. So this is a very popular book. I mean, it has a movie, so probably everyone already knows what this is about. But basically, this is a sci-fi dystopian book. It's set in the future in 2044. And in this world, people tend to escape their reality by going into this virtual reality game called the Oasis. And basically, the creator of the Oasis ends up passing away. And because he has no heirs, he basically says, look, I left an Easter egg inside my game. And if you can find it, you can inherit all my fortune and also get full control of the Oasis. So going from that, a bunch of people start trying to find this Easter egg, but for years, no one finds anything. And we follow our main character, Wade Watts, who is the first person to actually find the first clue that lets them make any kind of progress in this hunt. And basically going from there, it's a run against the clock because there's this huge corporation called the IOI, who is also trying to find this Easter egg because they want full control of the Oasis and they want to charge people to play this game because the Oasis is free. It's supposed to be a place for people to just kind of relax and be happy in, and they want to charge it, and Wade doesn't want that to happen. So yeah, this is just a really fun book. It's not perfect by any means, but I love these characters and I think it's just such a fun, exciting ride, and it has a bunch of 80s references which are really fun as well, and I love this book so very much. And now really quickly to end this video, I wanted to talk about some honorable mentions. Some of these books are books that while they don't really quite make my favorites list, they are still books that I really enjoyed and that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy and that they maybe should read. And a couple of the others are books that I haven't read in a long time, and so I don't know if they stand the test of time or if they would be favorites right now, but I still really enjoyed them when I read them, so I'm going to talk about them. So the first one is The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, and this is a magical realism book, and it has horror elements. The writing is beautiful, and in the beginning of the story, you see our main character. He is by now a middle-aged man, and he goes back to his childhood home because of a funeral, and he ends up recalling some events that happened in his childhood, and this book talks about those events, and they involve some magical stuff that happened and some really creepy stuff as well. And it just talks about the power of stories and humanity, and it's beautiful, and I think a lot of people would really, really enjoy this one. And it's just so short and quick to read, so I highly recommend it. And then the other one is Fahrenheit 451. Obviously, this is a classic, but I just think that this book, while probably a bunch of people have already read this and know what this is about, I think this book is so important. Like, I think it says so many important things about freedom of expression and of thought, and I just really, and it's also really, really fun to read, so I highly recommend this as well. I read this last year only, and it was definitely one of my favorites of the year. And now the last two I'm going to talk about, I don't really remember them, it's been a while, and they are both middle grade books, but I loved them at the time that I read them. So this one is A Monster Calls, and this is a Portuguese version, and so basically this is a really beautifully illustrated book. And it mostly talks about grief because we follow this little kid and his mom is sick and dying. And so we follow him as he's trying to grasp that truth. It's really powerful and it's sad but beautiful. So I highly recommend it. This is really popular. So maybe you have already read it, but if you haven't, I highly recommend it. And the last book that I'm going to talk about is Theodore Boone, Kid Lawyer by John Grisham. This is John Grisham's middle grade series, and this is just so much fun. This follows our main character. He's a kid who wants to be a lawyer, and so he gets involved into maybe some situations that he shouldn't, but he actually knows the law pretty well for a kid, and it's just so much fun. It's a fun middle grade series, and yeah, I loved them. When I read them, I was like 12, 13, so I was the target audience. But yeah, I needed to talk about these because I fell in love with this author when I read these, and also because they were favorites of mine when I read them. So yeah. Okay, so that's it for this video. It was so much fun to talk about so many stories that I love. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!